So we're now going to open our first panel, The Living Room of Tomorrow, with Bill Thompson. And Bill really is a new media pioneer. He's been working in and around the internet since 1984 and currently spends his time thinking, writing and speaking very well, I might say, about the digital world and that we're in the midst of building. Bill's an inveterate tweeter and describes himself as a new media dog, which I think proves that you can teach an old dog new tricks. During the 1990s, he was an internet ambassador for Pipex, and which was the first commercial ISP in the UK, where he developed websites for Comic Relief, the Edinburgh Fringe, and an MP called Anne Campbell. He then worked for Guardian newspapers, where he was head of new media and established the paper's first website in 1994. And I'm pretty proud that newspapers were really the first media online. And he was responsible for many of their online projects, including Eurosoccer.com. He's currently working with the BBC's Archive Development Group, finding ways to make the BBC archive more accessible, including, I suspect, people inside the BBC. Bill's a regular broadcaster. He appears each week on Click, which was formerly known as Digital Planet, broadcast on the BBC's World Service Radio, which I sometimes hear in the middle of the night when I'm having an insomniac phase. He also writes a monthly column for BBC's Focus magazine and makes occasional contributions to other publications and programmes. And in his spare time, Bill's visiting fellow in journalism at the visiting fellow in the journalism department at City University and a member of the board of the Writers' Centre in Norwich, and he was a founding trustee of the Cambridge Film Trust in his hometown. Now I'm going to indulge a little role reversal here and ask the interviewer a question before he introduces his panel. Now we're both old enough to remember the TV of the past, where we all sat in living rooms gathered around the set in sort of reverent silence with mum, dad and the children.
Doing my homework.
And sometimes there was, in fact, nothing on except the BBC test card. And one thing strikes me about today's debate about the future is that we often focus very much on the technology, and rather than remembering the real reason why we did all gather around those TV sets, which was to watch the TV programmes. So in your view, how can we make sure, as we consider the policies for the future, that we don't lose sight of what is really driving this massive revolution in TV, this seemingly insatiable appetite for great TV programmes?
Thank you for the introduction. For me, the key question is not to lose sight of the essential sort of our nature as human beings and the importance of family, the importance of the people in our lives, the importance of love and emotion and all those things. That if television and any of these forms of content do anything, they help us understand what it is to be people and what it is to live our daily lives. And so, as long as we don't lose sight of that, I think we'll do fine. If we just allow the commercial imperative to dominate, if we just allow the technology to dominate, then we will lose something incredibly valuable. We have to remember that we are people who live in the real world, and most of our engagement is with other human beings, and everything else builds on that. It can't be the other way around.
Yeah, I completely agree. So, would you like to introduce your panellists?
I would. In fact, I'm going to ask my panellists to introduce themselves because I reckon I couldn't do such a good job. Mostly because they all have such extensive CVs and are so significant that if I tried to pick out the 2 or 3 things that I thought were important, they'd end up resenting me for the rest of the panel and refusing to answer my questions. I do also actually say, before we kick off, though, that we're supposed to be a talk show on the living room of tomorrow. So really, the lighting should be low. We should have sofas, and each of you should come on to the accompaniment of a band and some quips from me with a ting at the end of it. So I do feel we haven't really lived up to the theatricality of what we were supposed to be doing here. And it does seem, whilst it's an absolutely wonderful room full of the highest possible technology, the chances of these people coming indiscreet because we gave them too much gin in the green room beforehand, for example, which is what you try to do on every real talk show on television, as you all know, are rather slim. But given those constraints, I trust we will enjoy ourselves and we can have a lively conversation thinking about what will technology bring to the living room, and we'll ask some interesting and hard questions. So what I'd like to do is, in the order that they're written down on my list of panellists, ask Christoph Dosch from IRT to just say a little bit about himself.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Bill Thompson. Great pleasure for us to be here, for me to be here. And my name is Chris Dosch, and I'm the General Manager of the IRT for collaborative projects. So I have to collaborate. There's all the projects we are doing with other partners. So communication is quite important in all my work. The IRT is the Broadcast Technology Institute of the Public Service Broadcasters of Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. So I'm here as a researcher for the future of broadcasting, but also to keep daily broadcasting alive and to solve some daily problems that might occur on the spot that we had not foreseen. But normally we are looking into the future. We are looking into what will be the questions of the broadcasters in 4 or 5 years, questions they do not know even yet, but they will ask us. Oh, sorry, I got off. Okay. IRT was a co-founder of the Europe technology platform NEM, Network Media, and that shows you already that we are really working in the real market, in the real life. So we are not working the ivory tower. And we are also co-inventor and a co-initiator of the HbbTV. This is now the system which is used in Europe for conversion of internet and broadcasting. I think we'll come to that and talk about that. We have 36 brands now in the market equipped, and many countries are picking that up. Personally, I'm not only a manager at the IRT, I'm also chairman of the study group 6 of ITU. ITU is the Worldwide Telecommunication Union and has committees, and one of the committees is the Broadcasting Service, and I have the honor to chair that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you are perfectly placed then to not only answer the questions, but to tell us what the questions are going to be. So we'll look to you for that. Our next panellist is Genevieve Bell from Intel, who's a great pleasure to see again. Genevieve's been on our radio show. Genevieve has been on our radio show on more than one occasion and always been an entertaining and stimulating guest.
And always without gin. I didn't realise that was something I should have been asking for. Genevieve Bell, I realise in this context, I'm the person who spends her time actually in human beings' living rooms. I'm a cultural anthropologist by training. I've spent the last 15 years in living rooms all over the world, watching people watch television and sometimes watching television myself. These days I run an advanced research and development lab at Intel where we are, according to my boss, responsible for reinventing the way we experience computing. You're already late, he says. So what I'm hoping to bring to this is actually something that Bill said at the outset, which is, to my mind, the future is actually about making sure that we create technology that delivers experiences that people will love. And in fact, explicitly, my team is chartered with the notion of working out what people will love and building the technology to deliver that. Something that makes my boss sometimes faintly uncomfortable. It turns out getting engineers to stand up and talk about love isn't the easiest thing. Who knew? More gin.
Thank you. I'd be worried if gin became the theme for the panel, but it does seem to be heading that way. But I suspect Damir Filipovic from Samsung will have a different perspective.
Well, possibly yes, because I'm engineer. I hope I could say something, maybe not about love, but maybe lovely. So I'm working for Samsung Electronics. We are rather fresh in town. But as a company, we are here for many decades, and I hope that some of you have something like this in your pockets, or maybe even some bigger pieces. And I think that our experience in technology can also help this panel to see what we can do for the future.
too many buttons to press up here. I don't know if any of you have been following on Twitter, but there are about 30 screens assembled in front of us, including the various tablets, smartphones and laptops and other things like that. So at one point I am going to press the wrong button and we will take off. It will be the ejector seat. Could I ask Yves Bausch to take the chair next as well? Just Yves, to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, good morning. Thank you for the introduction. And so I'm indeed working for SES. SES is one of the 2 largest satellite operators in the world. So we broadcast thousands of channels. We provide broadband. We have a lot of other operations. But today here it's obviously more about broadband. And already a few years ago we started working on the convergence of broadcast and broadband worlds. And so that's the main reason for me to be here today and to exchange views with the public and the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Yves. Next on the panel we have Jim Beveridge from Microsoft.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. And I have to say, ladies and gentlemen, I'm somewhat intimidated and excited at the same time. I'm somewhat intimidated because you can't see it here, but actually there's a phalanx of Apple products facing me. As when they mention tablets, they're all sitting, and I see Adam's got one there as well, so I'm somewhat intimidated to start off with. But I'm also excited the fact that I'm sitting next to Bill, and I didn't realize that Bill was a man behind Click, which is one of my favorite programs. So I've got a doctorate in watching television in hotel rooms around the world. My job is technology policy, and I look after Europe, Asia Pacific, and Latin America, so I travel a lot. And I look after a number of our immediate assets, including Xbox. So I'm here to talk a little bit about some of the converged products that we have and the policy implications of what's going on.
We're on the same. That's interesting. You press the button, it goes red, but the microphone stays the same. I don't know. So, thank you.
I can be your button presser.
I would be honoured. Finally, before we get too frivolous, could I ask Ad van Loon from Ex-Media Strategies to...
Yes, thank you, Bill. My name is Ad van Loon. I'm a 51-year-old lawyer who graduated 25 years ago. So Angela mentioned at the start of this seminar that she remembered the time that the BBC was only broadcasting a test chart. I can even remember that the broadcasters used to switch off the transmitters at midnight or even earlier after the hymn. And things have come quite a long way since then. My experience, I've experienced as an academic for many years, but also as in European policy making at the level of the Council of Europe, and also at the level of a national government ministry. And then I went on to work for the cable industry, which I did for 8 years, and since 4.5 years now I have my private consultancy business, and I assist film and TV producers, broadcasters and distributors in developing strategies for the multi-screen environment, in adapting their business models. That's on the one hand, and I also advise public authorities at many different levels, but on other issues than this.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's clear that we've got a wealth of experience in the room and understanding of how things are changing. So what I'd like to do is give everyone a chance, in a sense, to set out their stall and say, you know, if we are thinking about what technology will bring to the living room of tomorrow, then what are the key issues they think we need to face, and crucially, what innovations are coming down the line? What can we see now that will have an impact, or what could we reasonably anticipate as being created? I remember when Xbox was launched by Microsoft several years ago now, over
2001.
in 2001, I wrote a piece for the BBC saying, this is Microsoft's attempt to get into the living room. And Microsoft's PR people said, no, 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 not at all. It's just a games console. And I knew that it was a secret plan, because it was obvious, but it had to remain a secret plan so that children would persuade their parents to buy the console just as a games platform, and then Microsoft could continue to feed new features into it until they achieved the position they have today. So, are there any secret plans from any of you that you'd like to share with this small audience? And I think, why don't we, do you want to go first, Genevieve? And we'll just go down the table. That would be...
Wow, secret plans. Were they secret? Would I tell you? No. I think, you know, from where I sit, both as someone who spends her time with people in their living rooms, but also someone who works in, you know, one of the largest building block suppliers to most of the people at this table, I think, you know, for us, one of the things we know is that living rooms continue to be important. I mean, you know, it's not just nostalgia that you and Angela think about what it was like to be in those living rooms 10, 20, 30 years ago. People still come to living rooms. People may bring more technology to them than they did in those periods. But truthfully, when we were kids, we all brought other things to television anyway. The ironing, homework, food. I mean, it wasn't a solitary activity. Television didn't have our sole focus. And my sort of sense as we move forward is that one of the challenges becomes not about attention per se, but about the fact you have a series of devices that don't necessarily know about each other. And so as we look at, you know, what the future of a living room might be, it's not just about people who know each other, but devices who know each other too. And for me, the interesting thing there becomes what happens when it's not just people as the pivot point through devices, but devices actually talking to one another, passively gossiping to one another about what it is we're doing. And for me, you know, those become two interesting pieces. One, we know people continue to want to be with others, even if they're not paying attention to you, they do actually want to be in your presence. And then it's a matter of what do all the other devices that we bring do too.
And I suspect also the question then, can we cope in that environment that we have innately, if you like, we have evolved to have the tools to cope with other people. We don't necessarily have the tools to cope with our gossiping devices.
Well, you know, I think there's always been a kind of faint human anxiety about what it is that other things in our houses make sense of us. I mean, the people who perennially worry about what their cats are thinking about, you know, it's an extension here to worry about what our devices are thinking about. No, people worry about what their cats think about. It's a well-known rehearsed anxiety. Who knew? But I think, you know, it is this challenge of what we make of that. What's been interesting in some work my lab and I have been doing recently is that our anxieties about the technology, I mean, you would be unsurprised, but it's profoundly cultural. There are lots of places around the world where people are less concerned that their machines might be acting autonomously or on their behalf.
Thank you. I'll stop worrying about what my iPhone is thinking about me now.
You should keep worrying.
Christoph, can I ask you to take on from that and give your perspective?
No, I'm happy that we all agree that people will continue to have their living rooms. And
we have more volume.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sorry, but I can't hardly hear you.
I'm sorry. So I said I'm very happy that we all agree that people will continue to use their living rooms and will this kind of entity in their homes, which is a center where they live. And as it is a center where they live and spend a lot of time, they will probably, most people will not want to quarrel about technology. What they want to have is certainly good quality pictures and of course good programs, but we're talking here about technology. So they want to have good quality pictures, and there's certainly a trend to good quality pictures in the future. You know, 4K, 8K is on the horizon, and perhaps at some point in time we will see true 3D. As long as we have stereoscopic with glasses, this is not for the masses. People will, this according to me is a niche market. It's good for cinema, but it's not really good for the people at home. People like me or you would have to wear two glasses on top of each other. So this is not the real solution. The real solution, if 3D ever comes, is when we switch it on and we see 3D, we experience 3D, we feel 3D. So this is a holoscopic or even holographic solution. It's a long time to go, still from research to reality. So, but on a short term, I think, keep it on a short term, I think what we will see soon in the living rooms is certainly the second screen. And the second screen will be intelligent enough to recognize, the persons will be intelligent enough to recognize what the people are watching, and so to make the connection between what's going on the television screen and what's going on my second screen. And on the second screen I have all the converged services available. And now the real question is, are the services. How can I select the services? How do I find them? How are they recommended? That we touched already the gatekeeping issue, but that comes in later in the discussion, I think. So finding content, searching content, that is an important issue, and then consuming the content on the device you like. So content needs to be tailored. These are the short-term issues we have to solve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christoph. I already have a second screen in my living room. It's called the television. As in, for me, the primary screen is my laptop. And it strikes me that people who work in television do assume that they will always be the first screen. This has been an argument that's been going on for some time, as you know. But do you think that we will ever rebalance things in the living room so that the television will not be seen as the primary device, but one in an ecosystem of cooperating devices? Or is there something special about the big screen that will command our attention?
I think you're asking the wrong person, because I'm really a convinced broadcaster, and I do believe in the large screen, and I do believe in the charm of the large screen and on the attraction of the large screen. If you watch a football match in HbbTV or in 3D on a large screen, it looks much better, to me at least, but perhaps it's a question of habit, but to me it looks much better than if I watch it on an iPad.
Thanks very much. I suspect we'll come back to this one. Our next panelist is Jim Beveridge, and obviously interesting things have been surfacing at Microsoft recently that might have an impact on your living room strategy.
It's so subtle, isn't it? So thank you for that, Bill. Yes, it's so we have the three eyes. We don't really care. We have this concept in terms of smart glass. So you've got various different screens, but really they're just glass with interactivity behind them. And we have the three eyes. That it has to be immediate, it has to be immersive, and it has to be interactive. And if you're a service provider and you can perform that solution, then that's really what engages people. But you mentioned earlier on that we went back to 2001 and the launch of the Xbox. So if you go back to 2001, that was the start of Harry Potter. That was the first Harry Potter movie came out, so he was casting his magic at the box office. We had the Xbox that came out. We also had the first iPod. Apple came out with the first iPod, and that really changed the way we consume. Since we've got an Apple theme going on here, that's how we changed the consumption of music and the way we listen to music. But also, just after 2001, we had Minority Report with Tom Cruise. And if you remember, Tom Cruise had this holographic display, and he was moving screens around in that. And here we are 10 years afterwards, and we have the Kinect. So you can then use the Kinect. If you don't know what the Kinect is on an Xbox, and you can effectively gesture to your Kinect, and you can change channels. You can choose content. You can control the television set using your voice and through interactivity. So my point is that as what we think is being science fiction today might not be in 10 years' time. So the changes are all coming at a tremendous rate of knots, and we'll go into some of these changes as we go on.
Thank you. I've always felt with some bits of science fiction, and Minority Report is an example of that, it's not so much that the designers saw the future, it's that the technologists saw what they'd imagined and decided to build it for them because we thought it was so exciting. That's certainly the case with the works of William Gibson back in 1984, the science fiction writer who coined the term cyberspace. Those of us working on the internet in the mid-80s thought, that's so cool, we should have that, let's go out and make it happen. And we're still aspiring to do that. Our next panelist is Yves Bausch. Yves, can I ask you to set out your story?
Certainly. So as a satellite operator, we don't design devices or we don't design interfaces, so we are not that much on that side. We are a pipe provider, and I would even say a proud dump pipe provider. The only thing we have to make sure is that this pipe really copes with all the traffic that would be possible, so that all the traffic that is to reach multiple houses and thus economically makes more sense to go through satellite can find its way to where it will be consumed. So for that reason, we develop technologies or standards that make possible to reach all the devices in the home from the satellite. So our effort went more into the direction of declustering satellite as it is today. So, you know, the dish, the cable, and the living room, so but to be able to reach all the devices in the home. And the second point we find very important, what will change in the experience, as you said, in the living room, will be quality in the future. So on that side, that would be our secret plan, if you want, as disclosed by our CEO 2 weeks ago, would be to really push for the development of this Quad HD, 4K, and Ultra HD. That will provide better image, better sound, really a better user experience. And quite often when we discuss about that, people tell us, yeah, come on, with HD we have enough. HD is what you would get with a 2-megapixel camera. All of you, even in the most stupid, if I can say, device, have 8 million pixels, 12 million pixels, and you already see the difference on a printed picture on that side. So obviously on a large screen it will make a difference, and we believe that this is something we are to work on. All this obviously to provide a smarter TV experience, but again that's in the hand of our customers, the broadcasters, the pay TV operators, or the over-the-top players. We don't play with that. Again, we provide the pipe here and make sure it works. Thanks.
Thank you, Yves, who is apparently dumb and proud of it, which is great. I think that's really important that we have that. It is really important that we do have that infrastructure, actually, that we can deliver the bits efficiently and reliably into people's homes. Because obviously the lack of broadband infrastructure, which is something I'm sure we'll come back to, is a key factor in all of this. But then there's the quality of the devices that we actually watch it on at the other end, and how televisions themselves are going to change. So I wonder if I could turn now to Damir.
Thank you, Bill. Well, we have one, let's say, product of new generations we call smart TV, so we would like to become more smarter than we were maybe a couple of years ago. Of course, again, as you mentioned, it's very important to have the underlying infrastructure to enable actually us to deliver services via the smart devices. But I would maybe go one step further, not just to look what we can deliver. I think at the moment it's not even the question, about the device or technology. I think many things are already here, and many things are, I would say in a pipeline, and it will come very soon. So I think it's not at the moment maybe the question of the technology. It's maybe how we are doing this in a way. Do we have actually the right, let's say, standards? Do we have interoperability for this one? I think Genevieve mentioned part of it, because, it's okay to say, yeah, we would like devices to be connected, to communicate and so on, but do we have the right, let's say, underlying infrastructure to do that? Just one example. It was mentioned today, HbbTV. That's great. You have actually European specification, but you also have a lot of national variations, which means, for example, that if you want to deliver smart device, we have to do it in, I wouldn't say 27 different ways, but at least 10 different ways in Europe. So, it doesn't help. And if you go back to what Professor Pavel said, all of these things that we saw on her slides, you always have a kind of the US stamp, which is okay, don't get me wrong. But I think we should also ask the question, what can we do to maybe have EU stamp on it? So that would be maybe a question to think.
Thank you.
Yes, well, you asked, are there any secret plans? And I must say that I'm aware of a number of secret plans, which I cannot reveal because they're usually subject to non-disclosure agreements. But in general, it's all about who controls access to the living room. That's the start. New market entrants try to get access to the living room by putting their boxes into the living room. And what we see is an abundance of different set-top boxes. And in my opinion, I don't think consumers want more boxes in their home. So other solutions need to be found. And this you also see already on how to do this. Nobody wants to be depending on somebody else's set-top box. What you therefore see is the development of content that is offered, as it is called, over the top. For example, a company as Siemens and Utellis Communications, they have developed their systems by which they can, in a protected and closed environment, directly offer content to smart TVs without going through the middle, through the set-top boxes of cable operators or HbbTV operators. From a technological point of view, this is still a challenge, although it is a closed environment, especially if you use a system like, for example, Verimatrix, which is highly secure, but it's still not capable of offering quality of service, because you cannot control end-to-end the whole chain. It's a technical challenge, so you cannot offer quality of service and guarantee quality of service, which is still a challenge, but it will be solved, I guess. Now, why would these companies, all these companies, need access to the living room just to deliver television content? No, there's more behind it. Because if you control access to the consumer, certainly in a digital environment, you can, to a large extent, control what this consumer is doing. You can monitor exactly, if you wanted to, what the consumer is watching, when he's switching channels, etc., etc. This is, from a privacy point of view, of course, a big challenge for regulators, but it is happening already at the moment. And once you have these personal data, you can commercialize those data. See the discussion about Facebook, but basically everybody with digital access to the living room and interactive capacities can do the same thing. The other development that I see is that the living room becomes virtual, becomes portable. Consumers don't accept that whatever they can watch on their main screen, they cannot access when they travel. They want to have access to their channel package to which they subscribe, their pay TV package, wherever they are. Me, as an example, I travel a lot. So when I'm in Tokyo, for example, I can watch my own cable package because I installed a Sling box at home. Now, why do I need to do that? Why cannot the cable operator offer that as a service? This is a rights issue. So business models need to change. And just not to make this introduction too long, maybe one more word about the main screen, that the issue that was addressed earlier. I think the main screen in the living room will remain, but it will not be interactive. People will not write emails on the main screen and watch Facebook and Twitter, etc. What they will do, they will have multiple screens. They will have their tablet PC on which they can select, like a program guide, the different channels that are available to them. They can scroll through it, watch it on the second screen, and then they can say, if they find something interesting, to their partner with whom they are watching the main screen, look, on this other channel there's this interesting content, shall we watch that? And if the persons around the main screen agree, you can simply swipe it to the main screen. Samsung has it in place, LG, Philips also, but Samsung was the first, I think. And then you watch the next program. This is done independently of any set-top box. It's going through a kind of cloud service. So these are the developments that are taking place at the moment.
Thank you. That's a fascinating perspective on it, I think, and your conversation about sort of the dependencies that we have on building infrastructure around standards that allow us to free ourselves from the need to have multiple set-top boxes and multiple services is, I think, quite key in the idea of a single European data market generally and single European market for services. Now, we've heard from everyone. I wonder if there are any points that anyone wants to pick up on what someone else said before we move on slightly. If anybody would like just to take issue with any of the other panelists or perhaps expand on what they've said, this is your opportunity.
Well, I'd just like to say, I think one of the big changes is the relationship between the content producers, the distributors, the device manufacturers and the consumers is changing. I think in the old days, currently we had a linear relationship between the people who did the content, people who did the set-top box, the people who viewed. It was a one line. But I think now, come to your point, I think people now get the choice of content across multiple platforms. We'll come on to standards in a minute, and we'll talk a little bit about ultraviolet, which is why the technologies and systems that allows that sort of thing. But I think that fundamental change is really going to drive a lot of change in the industry.
Thanks, Jim. Does anyone else want to make a point at this stage in the conversation?
Just to add the importance of standardization on a European, at least on a European scale, because that also ensures the horizontal market, something the public service broadcasters are very much interested in. So we really defend that the end user can buy any equipment that is compatible, that is certified, and can use it. Can be low cost, can be high end, and it does not depend on the box that is delivered by the cable operator, for example. Sorry.
Thank you. You need to actually speak directly into the microphone, I think. We depend on standards. I think we all agree we depend on standards, and the nice thing about standards is there are so many of them to choose from. Remains a problem. Would anybody in the audience, since I suspect many of you have an enormous expertise in this area, like to make a contribution at this point? If you do, please raise your hand, and if you could say who you are. Be very happy to take a comment or two. Gentlemen.
Ruprecht Niepel from One hypothesis is that there is no such thing like a living room. There's a bedroom, there's a bathroom, there's a cellar where you have all sorts of activities. And as a normal human being, one of the problems I have in connected content consumption in my home is that I don't have a good way of distributing this in the home. So there is a lack there, I think.
Thank you. And apparently Jim has a solution. So he'll be.
So,
no wires, please.
So, but you. I think that is one of the interesting use cases. So I am a bit of a gadget fan, I have to say, but I can, with the without involving new standards, but using existing standards, I can start watching a Netflix movie on my TV screen through my Xbox. I can then take that up to the bedroom and finish watching it on a tablet. The one's already sitting beside me. And then in the next morning, I can actually take my phone and on to work. I can actually continue to watch that movie. Now, that's already available today, but the thing is that not that many people know that. And it does tend to be the technologically astute people who do that. And there's quite a gap between the people who know how to do these things and the people who don't.
Thank you. Actually, that's quite a good lead in to like the next topic for debate, because one of the reasons why access to those sorts of tools and services is limited to, shall we say, the geeks and the nerds, if I'm not, my fellow geeks and nerds, is that the standards are not fully there yet, that we don't have a digital single market, that we can't guarantee that everything will be plug and play. And so I wonder if we could address the question of, what are the real barriers to that? Is it that the technology is moving so fast that there's no point trying to standardize yet? Is it that consumer resistance means that we will never actually reach a stable point? Are the manufacturers, all the different components of the value chain just never going to work together? What issues stand in the way? Now, I suggest we start over at this end of the table with Ard.
Well, in my opinion, there's no point in trying to standardize anything, because the world is changing so rapidly. If you try to do it, remember that at one stage at the European level it was tried to make a standard out of analog HbbTV, and by the time that the US had decided that HbbTV should be digital, then Europe pulled back and said, oh, wait, if it's going to be digital, then it might not be wise to adopt an analog standard. So because of the length of regulatory and policy processes, it will be very difficult to standardize it if you mean by standardization that the regulator has to step in. But of course the industry has to develop standards, and they will do, because it's eventually it's commercially interesting.
But, I mean, we heard earlier from Damir that, you have to make smart TVs, you have to work with at least 10 different and presumably incompatible standards. So the market's not delivering.
No, I mean, market is delivering in a way, and manufacturers are working on it. You have also what Ad mentioned. You had DVB Group, so to develop digital TV standards for Europe. The thing is, when it comes to the national implementation, you have, let's say, tweaks at the national level that actually makes something which should be unique European, let's say, standard, different for different markets. And you have similar things for HbbTV. The thing is actually at the national level. That's one of the things. The other thing is, there are, of course, some barriers. Jim mentioned ultraviolet and so on. That's all fine. But it can work in one country. It can work in the US. I don't know how it can work in Europe, because it's not about technology and how you will make seamless access to all the devices. But then you have issues like copyright. If you have some services, let's not mention now, but okay, we can mention, let's say, Spotify after, I don't know how many years, you have it in 10 EU countries. Why not in 27?
You want an answer? I think that we mustn't just park it, we'll have to come back to that. Yves, as providers of the pipes, do you see this as being something that matters to you, or are you just shipping enough bits around that it won't be an issue?
Sort of. So if I take the example of HbbTV, for instance, the part we broadcast is the standard part, and the trouble is with what comes on the terrestrial interactive part. So, but that's just a detail. On our side, the issue is not that much, the issue perceived is not that much the one of standard, but the one of reach. So what you have today, for instance, only 60% of the European households can get a quality IPTV terrestrial-only experience. And we believe that this will worsen in the future with these new standards we mentioned before. I mean, the quality standards like the 4K and the Ultra HD. And that one way or another, we will have to go to a better integration of broadband and broadcast. Not satellite only, it can be DTT or other means, but at one point, well, there is no unique infrastructure answer to that problem, but somebody will have to take and pick the best of all the worlds. And there you will need a standard to have this some kind of a smart routing implemented so that you always take the best way to shift the bits, these plenty of bits, as you mentioned before, to the home or to the people if they are on the move or at home or wherever they stay in their home, as mentioned earlier, within the home, but also on the backbone side. And so I would say the important thing is not to recreate the divide, not that we have a connected TV divide in the future with people not being able to experience all the goods you are promising here today, and people who can have, thanks to the fiber, full access to this.
Thank you. I think not recreating the divide strikes me as a really important principle, that historically there have been for many reasons these divisions, and we must avoid taking measures which will lock them into the new systems that we are developing, even if we don't actually go fully down the standards route, as Ad has been saying. If we don't lock everything into standards either, we need to find that balance. Now, as we were talking here, Angela whispered in my ear, I've got something to say about this. So, Angela, I'm going to indulge you.
Okay. Well, just really to give you some experiences from the work we're doing on standards in rights data. First of all the people who came together in the project said, we wished we had started this 10 years ago, because we are in silos. There are lots of standards, but the standards are in silos. And so now a huge part of our work is creating interoperability between the standards and building in commonality between how the standards work for the different sectors. And it's incredibly important, and it's urgent, and we've got to do that. But that's all about the standards in how you express your rights and how you communicate your rights through the supply chain. As part of the work, the other thing is everyone is also looking towards formats, because of course a lot of the companies who are involved in the project are publishers, and they're involved in e-book standards or TV standards, and they're saying we have to make sure we don't lock ourselves into these silos when it comes to formats, and create in advance, or at least anticipate, interoperability of the formats as well, because that's what the consumers want. Consumers don't want to be locked into proprietary devices. They want to be able to experience their content across all their devices, and they don't actually care where the content comes from. They just want the content, and they don't think in silos. They don't think in terms of newspapers, or, well, sometimes they think in terms of brands, but they don't sort of think in terms of these silos that we've all locked ourselves into. So from our experience, I would say standards really are important, and at least interoperability in the standards and formats, and anticipate it in advance if you can.
And back to the word interoperability, of course, part of the problem is that different organisations, different companies' business models rely on them having control, on being able to limit the uses that are made of material, on being able to patent their devices and their technology so they can restrict its access in the market. And you know, what we hope for is a regulatory environment which will balance out all of these competing interests, all of these legitimate competing interests. I mean, Jim,
Yeah, so I would actually disagree with you, Bill, that we need more standards. I actually think we've got enough standards. I think we just need to have an inventory of what we've got and work out how better to deploy it. I think that's one of the issues. I mentioned ultraviolet, and a colleague mentioned it as well. It came about because the movie, this thing called ultraviolet, which effectively was driven by the movie studios, seeing the demise at one point in time of the DVD, thought to themselves, well, there's going to be a future which is going to be a digital future, but that digital future isn't going to work if we're going to have a Paramount format and a Fox format and a Universal format that don't talk to each other. We still want to have our own business models. We still want to be able to compete in the marketplace, but we need to have a framework whereby we can get secure content to a number of different devices, and the consumer shouldn't care whether he's getting his movie on his Xbox or his PlayStation or his cable box. That shouldn't be an issue. And so they effectively put together a set of standards which are now being ratified in ISO and MPEG, which allows that ecosystem to flourish. So one of the good points for the consumer is that once you buy a movie, there is a rights locker in the sky, in the cloud, that says you've bought that movie. So you don't have to buy another copy of that movie for your next gadget. So if you're the poor consumer that started off buying a movie on a laser disc and then bought the VHS copy and then bought the DVD copy, bought the Blu-ray copy, no longer do you have to do that. There's a system in place now that can allow you to access your content and recognise as you bought it.
Thank you for that. And certainly finding mechanisms, technologies, use of existing standards to make the consumer experience as seamless as possible seems to me absolutely vital. But Christoph, I suspect that given your work, you're aware of emerging standards for the things that we might want to do tomorrow. So we might actually need some new standards, whatever Jim says.
Sorry, I try to speak into the microphone.
Don't look at me. Look at me.
Exactly, don't look at you, look at the podium. So, dear auditorium, can you hear me now? Yeah. The point is that we can't do without standards, because if you have a pipe like the Astra satellites, for example, streaming content to 120 million people at the same time, it is one signal. And I can tell you how difficult it already is for our broadcasters to provide content in various forms. Because we have to, for example, we have to tailor the content so that it fits an iPhone, that it fits an iPad, that it fits an Android, that it maybe fit the Surface in the future. So they all use different video player, they all use different formats, and if they are used to address the servers of the broadcasters for HbbTV, for example, it's not simply one format we have to supply. We have to supply every content in several formats, and that is quite an effort. And so if we could agree here on better...
There's a conspiracy going on here.
End of the show. So if we could agree here on one or two formats that would make life much easier. And I would like to add something. It is not only the national authorities that tweak a standard and make it difficult sometimes because they extend, for example, a standard like HbbTV to their national needs. It is all it's also the manufacturers themselves who try, of course, it is legitimate because they try to get the biggest share of the market as possible, but to try to make sure that the customers, the end users, are using their portal and not the portal of somebody else. So it's again the battle for the consumer, the battle for who is the gatekeeper. And so this is another area where we see that standards are not really used as they are written down, and they are slightly tweaked, and then we have again a problem in the market.
Thank you. Genevieve, would you like to tell us all why we're wrong?
Sure, but possibly not for the standards conversation. I think, actually, I wanted to return to a point you started out with, which is to remember that the living room isn't just about television and never has been. And as we think about what the living room of the future is, it also means it's going to be a living room full of other devices, and arguably the language we have about the current standards may not scale. So if we think about what it means to imagine television content across multiple screens, historically we've had watershed hours, we've had notions about what content was appropriate at what hours that have been set by communities and countries. Those now come into question. And I think increasingly if we imagine that a living room is also going to be populated by a range of different screens doing different things that run the gamut from, you know, the prosaic and mundane of online banking and financial services and healthcare to the more kind of, you know, emotional and affective, like online dating, social networking, all of those things. There's a whole lot of activities that will be happening in the living room on a series of screens that will evoke a different set, if not standards, of regulation. And, you know, conversations about privacy, about reputation, about trust, are not conversations we've had to have in the living room when it was effectively, for better or worse, a one-way broadcast medium, but we're now talking about levels of interactivity and immersiveness, I think were your words, and that starts to, his words, starts to mean imagining a different conversation where standards aren't what consumers are thinking about. Consumers aren't sitting around saying, oh, I do wish someone would solve that standard. Either they've already fixed it in ways that would make us all faintly uncomfortable, or it's just not something that's part of their, in some ways, scope. So either thinking about how you engage consumers in this conversation or how you make some of this work invisible, imagining that the work is different than it's ever been, is part of what a living room of tomorrow conversation is going to have to include.
Thank you, and it comes back to, you know, consumers, the people formerly known as the audience, the individuals who are out there enjoying, experiencing what we are hoping to create and deliver into their living rooms. And I suspect any conversation that is not firmly grounded in that will quickly run into the ground or become a conversation between technologists trying to deliver the perfect experience for an audience that will never actually show up. I wonder whether Martin Kahler would like to stand up and explain why he calls what we're talking about nostalgic television in his Instagram posting. Is Martin around? There. Martin, what's nostalgic about our conversation here? That was the comment. You see, we're watching the Twitter feed, so be warned, so that we will pick you up on these things. Would anyone other than Martin like to interject at this point in the conversation? Yes, Richard down there.
Yeah, hi. Speaking from the third-party developer...
Could you press your mic on?
Hello?
You need to press the button. There's a magic button. Okay, we're having a great consumer experience.
Is that working now? Sorry. Too many screens around. My screen's covering it. As a third-party developer coming from the web, this is quite an interesting conversation. And coming to standards, it's a nightmare for us in terms of smart television. It's interesting to note that a Smart TV Alliance was formed yesterday between Philips, LG, Sharp, and possibly some other partners, and we are hoping that Samsung will make a move in that direction. But and also Opera, in terms of the rendering engine, is also moving strongly into the TV space, and we're quite excited about that because we really want to develop once and go across multiple devices. And we understand that it may be a Darwinian process, like it was for mobile, but, you know, preferably it would be nice to see some more defragmentation. That's just a comment I have on the future of standards.
These gentlemen are muttering HTML5 in my ear. as if it's one thing. Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Does anyone else want to add to our discussion around the standards world? As I say, there are so many opinions about standards as well as so many standards. My understanding is that what Richard is arguing is that if you're just a traditional television producer, it's easy. You make something that looks like video and you provide it and it gets streamed out and people know how to put video onto screens. But if you're developing something more complex and sophisticated, an application, a service, even a platform, then the integrated devices that are available today make it very, very difficult. They make it completely impossible to have one version of the thing you write and then to deploy it across all of the different ranges of devices that could, in theory, support it. And this adds enormously to the development costs and the timescales. It means as each of these devices and platforms changes, you have to update what you're doing, so it damages digital entrepreneurship and the whole digital economy. And if the various manufacturers and those who control those devices could work together in collaboration, it would be possible to have a method which allowed you to write your stuff once and have it made available on everything, and that would increase the efficiency of the market.
Thanks, Bill.
Good. All those years as a journalist not wasted after all. We talked about consumers. We have with us a panel of people who represent all the different levels of the value chain, and in Genevieve, someone who's actually right at the bottom, the silicon, but more importantly, right at the top, the neurons. She crosses this divide. But who's going to control what appears on the screens? The next question I want to put to all of you is what are the different roles that should be played or are being played or could be played by the manufacturers, by the broadcasters, by the cable providers, by companies like Microsoft in determining the shape of the living room of the future, and what would be a good outcome. Okay? And the key question is, what would be a good outcome, not just who's going to win the fight. So could I start, let's see, where would be a good place to start? Can I start with you, Jim?
Okay, so so I think, who controls it? I think it is the consumer that controls it. I think more and more choices are becoming available. Technology is being developed to allow people to have that choice. We, a couple of weeks ago, there was a big games conference called E3 in the States, and we announced something that was called Smart Glass. And Smart Glass really is our play in enabling tablets. Doesn't matter whether it's a Windows tablet or an Apple tablet or an Android tablet or an Android phone, but effectively being able to control the TV set by using the second screen. And we see much more interactivity taking place between the TV set and the second screen. I mean, I was sitting at a dinner table last night and I was thinking you could be watching Bonanza, because that's my generation knows Bonanza, and you could be looking up Horse Cartwright, What Happened to Little Joe or Horse, and people said to me, well, Jim, that's not going to resonate with your audience today, think of something else. So they came up with Game of Thrones. You could be watching the Game of Thrones and having you on your second screen, the tablet, showing you what was happening to Westeros on the Games of Thrones. So that sort of thing is happening. So I think, so what's going to appeal to the consumer is that sort of interactivity, and if there's competing systems who offer that, then he's going to go for the system that offers him that flexibility. He's going to go for the system that allows him to use a number of different screens that he owns today and not have to buy someone else's screen in order to get that experience.
So cobbling something, sorry, English phrase, making things work from what's currently available is a preferred option to just sort of always taking the latest devices. Damir, so no more sales for your smart televisions because we're just going to link in our old ones.
Well, I'm afraid I don't have an answer to that today. But on the answer, actually, who should control the screen, I definitely am convinced that they should be the consumer. And you have today the situations that even if you have smart TV, you have some, let's say, broadcasters that actually prohibit manufacturers to display third-party applications, for example, like Facebook, which is, I would say, so widespread that it's, I think, unacceptable for the consumers not to have it. And then they will have to choose the television just, to have Facebook or not to have. I mean, this I think shouldn't be the case. And what I think is also very important, if there is any limitation or restriction, I think it should be clearly communicated to the consumer at the point of sale. And this, I think, is something which is, everybody is in a way aware of it, but no one is clearly communicating this. So it's not maybe, you might have the choice, but it has to be clearly communicated then to the consumers. If you choose this, you have this. If you choose something else, you might have something different.
I think Thank you. Sorry, I'll say that again. Today's programmable technologies allow the manufacturers or network owners to reach in and change the functionality of the devices. How do you manage that?
It's true that you have also this today, but at the end of the day, you need to make, I would say, regular updates on any device that is, I would say, software driven, and every device in principle today, modern device, is software driven. So you have to make some updates. The thing is, of course, how it is done and what is the awareness of the consumer about that. Yeah, I mean, usually it goes, I would say, to the benefit of the consumer, meaning usually more things are enabled, not disabled. But in any way, I think it's also about raising awareness of the consumers, what is going on and what does it mean for them.
Thank you, and I think that point about consumer awareness is probably a key one. Ard, what's your view about who should be in control?
Well, you can look at this question in two ways, either as a threat or as an opportunity, and I'm optimistic, so I'd like to look at the opportunities here. There's always parties who want to control access or to dominate markets, and it started all out with state domination. Broadcasting was dominated by states, and if you were lucky enough to live in a democratic and a free country, it was not a state broadcaster, but it was a public broadcasting system in which everybody would have some say. But still, it was carefully controlled by the regulator. Not anymore today, because consumers changed, maybe due to education or to different attitudes, but nowadays the consumers don't accept this anymore, because if you think in terms of threats, like the music industry did a few decades ago, it's going down the drain. So you have to look at the opportunities that is offered in the new are offered in the new environment, and consumers potentially have more choice theoretically, but in practice there are still parties, market parties in this case, trying to dominate consumer access to content, to infrastructure, for obvious reasons, because they think they can make more money that way. I think in the end it will be very dangerous. You have to provide what the consumer wants, namely access to content anywhere, everywhere, at times chosen by the consumer. That's what consumers want. And if you go against this consumer wish, you won't survive. So in my opinion, who should control the living room? It's the consumer, and providers, whether producers or broadcasters or distributors, should realize this and try to develop a business model, change their business model, so that they could meet these consumer requirements. If they are successful, consumers will like them, see Spotify, and the company will survive.
Thank you. I think that's a really helpful perspective. And Christoph, I wonder if it's one that sort of you share within IRT, thinking about where the broadcasters are going. Is this how your strategy is being developed?
So, the broadcaster strategy is definitely to maintain the competition. We dislike to see domination of the end user. And that can happen, for example, I don't say it does happen, but it can happen by a network operator. It can happen in IPTV, it can happen in cable TV. The broadcasters cannot block Facebook, for example. And indeed, we are just working on the version 2 of HbbTV specification, and one of the new features, apart from HTML5, will be the inclusion of social functions. So while you are sitting in front of your television set, using your second screen, for example, and you can chat via HbbTV with your friends and tell them that you like or dislike that program, or I don't know, the head of the presenter or whatever. And of course you can also do commercial, you can do commerce on, and things like that. But the broadcasters have no control over the delivery. That is the IPTV operator or the cable operator that can block, for example, if you have everything in one hand. But HbbTV is a very nice standard. It's a very open, business neutral standard, and that's quite important. So if you are not happy with your cable operator offering you the IP service, you simply connect your DSL output to the or your Ethernet connector to the DSL output of the telecom provider, and you can easily combine the two networks on your television sets. You are not bound to use it from one hand.
Thank you. I think this model of sort of pushing some of the functionality down into the standard, down the stack, so that it's out of the control of the individual broadcaster, whatever, seems to me it may well be a way forward, though it does lead to changes to or developments of standards, which will probably upset Jim now. Yves, what's your perspective on this, or is this immaterial to you?
Up to a certain point, yes. So from a network provider perspective, the only thing we make important is that we remain as open as possible for all possible usages, so that we don't create a gatekeeper position, or that we don't prevent other people from having creative usage of what we broadcast. So to take an example, today quite some network operators or telecom operators have deployed hybrid solutions. They take satellite and broadband at the same time, and some of them started their service even without talking to us. So signal is completely open to them, and they pick up what they want, and so we believe that's, say, our contribution then to making the system, as you said, remove these boundaries you mentioned before. On the control of what's actually happening, of course, there is some level of control. I think we are even extremely controlled from that perspective, in the sense that you would not have offensive content going on satellite, or broadcasters have to be registered. So there is some level of protection, at least, certainly for the right holders, and also protect children's or the industry. If I just wanted to add something, obviously the consumer has to be in charge of deciding what he wants to watch, but I would also like to have the relevant tools to control what's happening in terms of parental control, and that might be more and more difficult in connected worlds.
Okay, very briefly.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, we're very for standards in this domain, and I mentioned the work has been going on in MPEG-Dash before. But I would just say there's a danger that we get overexcited about standards, because standards exist. It's the implementation of standards. One of Bill's colleagues, the guy called Daniel Danker, and I went to a conference that Daniel was at the other week there, and he was talking about how he tried to talk his 80-year-old mother into connecting up her connected TV. And when it comes up on the screen and says, enter your web password, he knew he was in difficulty. And so I think when these are all standards that already exist, so if the consumer has got to be enlightened and excited, then it's not just the standards, it's got to be the implementation of standards and the easy use.
And somebody who knows about how consumers engage is obviously Genevieve. Can I just interject there?
So in fact, what I was going to say in all of this is two things. One is that we cannot keep referring to the consumer as though that were a monolithic whole. It would be really good if the rest of you could actually refer to consumers as though they were occasionally women, and not 80-year-old mothers who don't know how to use things. But every single one of you, when you talked about a consumer, said he does something. I suggest that there might be women, not you, there might be women consuming things too. But not only are consumers not monolithic in the sense that they are multiple genders, they're also multiple ages. They come from different demographies, they come from different countries. Many households, at least 2/3 of households, have more than one occupant. Those occupants are usually in a fierce battle about what content will be shown on a multiplicity of screens, the television screen as well as all the other small screens in the home. imagining that there will be a single gatekeeping point and that will be some singular consumer is deeply misleading. We know that in the historical deep recesses of nostalgia TV time, there used to be a gatekeeper of television content, and it was usually the person who had the remote control or the person who had the TV guide. One might want to suggest in a world of smart interconnected devices that we will end up with the remote control wars being reprised with the swiping content off the screens wars, because in fact there is rarely agreement in a household about what it is that people want to be engaging in. So number one, yes, consumers will have a role in all of this, but it won't be a singular, easy to comprehend role, and it will always be complicated by who's in the house, what they want, what their demographics are, where they live. But the second thing is that it's easy to sit here and say, well, of course consumers should be the ultimate control point here, but if we're suggesting that, that is to be something they have never been before. And in fact, that is a suggestion that is far more radical than any of you are letting on. Because historically there are multiple control points and gatekeeping forces about what content is produced. It comes from the state, in terms of what content is seen to be appropriate to circulate both in broadcast but also on the internet. It comes from what gets funded and what gets produced, both in the user-generated content space, but also in the professional space. It is in some ways gate-kept by the form of the network. Is the broadband infrastructure and the broadcast infrastructure true two-way? Is it geared towards download? Is it metered? How is the metering constituted? It's gate-kept by a whole plethora of other things that we might loosely have glossed. And I don't mean these words to be as loaded as they are, but as censorship, surveillance, and forms of control, right? But if we're suddenly now saying, no, the consumer is going to be in control of everything, that's actually a radical proposition, and one that has consequences for everyone here in different ways. And if we were saying that, I would then argue, which consumer did we think it was?
Because the consumer, like the audience, is a construct, an abstract, and you spent a lot of your professional life figuring out that there is no typical consumer, and therefore for everyone here to want to abrogate, to give control to the consumer, is essentially to say, let someone else take the blame. Thank you. We're going to have one last round of comments from the panelists, but before we do that, I was going to ask Annalisa if she could just share with us some of the things that came up in the online discussion before this panel.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Annalisa De Luca, and I'm the person behind the live tweeting today. And concerning this, I'm afraid I have to announce that my account has just been banned for over-tweeting. Just a few minutes ago. So, but there's a lot of people actually contributing to live tweeting the event today. So keep on with the good work. And not many questions. So I don't know if it's because we are actually addressing all the points raised during the online discussion in the past few weeks, or whether you're being shy. But in any case. And so I'm not sure if everyone is aware of that, but the Commission has also asked me to moderate and to animate the online discussion about the Digital Agenda Review online on the digitalagenda12.eu platform. So over the past few weeks, we have been collecting people's feedback and suggestions and policy recommendations. And within this theme, I think the three main arguments have already been discussed, and these are mainly citizen empowerment, technology fragmentation was felt very, very strongly about, and as Angela Mills-Wade mentioned, preventing a data lock-in, and also non-discriminating technology standards. I will take this opportunity also to encourage people who have participated, and some of them are here today. I see Gianluca sitting over there, and so I will invite you and encourage you to actually help us understand if we've addressed the key topics correctly. Thank you.
Oh.
I will try and create a fake account over the coffee break for more live tweeting.
I think that is a great testament to the need to have standards that don't allow gatekeepers too much control, really. And as a disgruntled consumer, I'm sure you'll be making your comments clear to everyone. Thank you very much, Annalisa. We are almost out of time here, and so what I'd like to do is offer everyone on the panel an opportunity to make a last comment, but to say that don't feel it's compulsory. Okay, if you have something to say, we want to hear it, but there is no demerit to not saying anything. So we'll run down from Genevieve down, if you want.
I would like to say 3 words. Sorry, I would like to say 3 words.
Loudly into the mic.
Make it simple. And this is not only for those who are 80 years old, it is for everybody. Because if it's complicated to operate, then even those who are able to do it don't want it.
Yeah, just quickly, I think one of the things we perhaps miss is the tremendous opportunity for Europe in terms of how all these new platforms need creative talent to build stuff for them. So, for example, one of the things that we've been doing is we've been working with Sesame Street and National Geographic. So we'll be coming out at the end of the year with a program for the Connect where the kid can interact with the Cookie Monster and Elmo. He can learn the alphabet, learn how to count, and has his picture, her picture on the screen. So it's sort of reverse 3D. Rather than 3D coming out to you, the kid actually goes into the screen and interacts with them. So I think there's a tremendous creative opportunity for people to invent for these platforms.
Maybe just a couple of words, and that's enable interoperability, avoid fragmentation, and at the end of the day, it's all about content.
Yes, just coming back, and a strong warning here, we should not underestimate the power and the will of the consumer. I see a movement, and many big companies have already seen this movement, that the consumer is going to be in charge of their personal data, and there will be a new platform before any content on a smart TV will be accessed. There will be a demand by consumers that they can decide first, before they access any service, what type of personal data can be used for which purposes by an individual content provider, or any company. It doesn't have to be a content provider. So this is more of a helicopter view, but I think there's a movement that consumers want to be more in charge of their own personal data. And I predict, maybe that's a nice way to end this panel, that if Facebook continues to use personal data in the way they do now without asking, within 1 year they will be virtually nowhere, because consumers will not accept infringement of their privacy or use for commercial purposes if they have not explicitly permitted this. And this will be the same for all companies and all content providers.
And in the living room of the future will be one in which the buttons work, in which we assert control over our personal data, in which we're still engaged by the television screens, in which interoperability and the sensible use of current standards will allow as many bits per second as we can to be delivered to the finest quality screens. Okay, well, it's a model of the future. I'll be sitting there with my smartphone in the cellar, I imagine. Thank you to all the panelists for your fine contributions. Thank you to Caroline for setting us up for this debate, and to Angela. We're now breaking for coffee, I understand, back here in half an hour. Thank you all. Thank you, Annalisa, too.